When did you serve at the Nevada test site?
So to break it down properly, Nevada test site is where they did all the tests, right? Almost all the nuclear tests, which is part of the Nevada Test and Training Range. So that's the whole thing. That's like the state. And it's broken down into kind of like counties. And my part was the Tonopah Test Range. That's where I was. And we were sister bases with Groom Lake. And I was there. I signed into Nellis in December of 1983. And I was uprange until July of 1987.
The Nevada Test and Training Range encompasses 3 main areas, including Area 51. Is that right?
Right. So there's all kinds of little places, but it's a large area. And in there you have NTS, Nevada Test Site. You have the Tonopah Test Range, and you have Groom Lake. What people commonly refer to when they talk about Area 51 is Groom Lake and Tonopah, because we're sister bases and we're both classified bases. We're 70 miles apart probably, but all of it is within the Nevada Test and Training Range. Even Crete Air Force Base is technically on NTTR, Nevada Test and Training Range, but it's a known place that you drive right past it going down the highway.
Understood. What were you and the other veterans tasked with doing?
So I was security police, which was base security and like the local cop for protecting all of our assets that we had. Most people know, it's common knowledge now, we have the F-117 stealth fighter, and I was up there and left a year before that was announced to even exist. We had an organization, a squadron called Red Eagles, which was a squadron of Russian MiG fighter jets that would go out and train against the American pilots, whether it be the Air Force or Navy, Marines, whoever would go up there. And that was a big part of what we did.
What was so top secret about this work?
At the time, the concept that stealth technology existed was, I'm not going to say fairly well known, but it was known. And the secret was nobody knew how to make it, use it, or defend against it. Right? That was the weapon system. Nobody could do anything about. It was really an unstoppable weapon system. And so it was the technology behind it. That's what we were there to make sure nobody got.
And I know Pomp mentioned this in a previous interview, that all of you were handpicked to be there. Is
Correct.
that right?
Correct. You had to go through an interview process from our pilots and commanders all the way down to us. You had to, you went through an interview process. Like when I was in tech school, when I was going through the Security Police Academy, somebody came out and it was actually the cop squadron commander at the time, and interviewed a bunch of people, and they selected who they wanted, and then you had to go through background checks and then a full security clearance check. And from the time I did my security clearance to the time I was finally cleared was probably about 4 months. So it was pretty extensive. They went around and they talked to people I went to high school with, they talked to employers, they talked to a whole bunch of people, and in order to see if we would qualify to go up there. Then once you got your security clearance, they finally told you what you were going to do and where you were going to go.
What did you think when you first of all, when you were finally selected? Were you proud?
I didn't want the job. So I was in tech school. You have the training staff and everything. And then amongst the trainees, there's like a rank structure. When you sign up, you fill out a dream sheet. The dream sheet is the list of all the places you want to go. You later learn that you're pretty sure nobody ever looked at that. But I wanted to go overseas. I'm from Phoenix. I wanted to go see somewhere. And I didn't care where. I literally put down anywhere overseas. So I get an assignment to Area 2 Nellis, which is the old nuclear weapons storage area that's at the main base right here in Vegas. And being, at the time, junior enlisted, I was a brand new airman, you can get orders, you can request orders in 9 months. So I was like, okay, great, I can go there, I can get orders in 9 months. When I took all the trainees down that were interested in interviewing for this job, this is what they told us about the job. They said, you're going to live in Vegas for 4 years, and we can't tell you what you're going to do. But you'll live in Vegas for 4 years, so that's obviously cool. And that's all we knew. And I'm like, I'm out. I don't want it because I'm already going to Vegas. I'm from Phoenix, so I'm from a desert. I'm going to a desert, and I can get orders out of there real easy. So that's what I wanted to do. And then a few weeks later, I get an amendment to my orders that says I was selected for this special duty assignment. So I was like, yeah, well, whatever. And then I was hoping there was some other training I was in line for. And they told me, but you're going to get out of all this training. And that ended up not being true either. So it just is what it is. You got the job. And then the curiosity started as after you go down and you fill out, and this is back in the 80s, so it's not, everything's not online. You actually have to handwrite out all these forms. And you start getting curious because it was a stack of paperwork that you had to go through your entire life history. And you're calling back, I'm calling back to my parents going, what was my address when I was 5 years old? And going through all these things. So then you start to get real curious and kind of excited because based on watching everybody else, you're doing something different. And you had no idea how different.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it ended up being something really cool. But, I mean, you're clueless. And when they come in, when I got to Nellis in December, just after Christmas, you sign in and they're like, great, glad you're here. You got a dorm room in a temporary living facility, and we'll see you after the first of the year. And you're coming up thinking you're going to work. And you're like, great, so now I get a few more days off, and then you come back and they're like, all right, your job is you have to check in every other day. And so we're all up here in Vegas, and there was about 7 of us. And none of us had any idea what we were doing. They wouldn't tell us anything. They just said, check in every other day. We'll let you know when you're going to go to work.
Dave, I can see that this is emotional. What's going through your mind? What's emotional about this?
It's just, I get super emotional about stuff anyways. My family will all tell you. But it's just, when you look at where we're at, it's just, you're sitting in my living room. God damn. You're sitting in my living room and people are talking to us all the time and we're telling stories that are bad. So that's what I think about. We're not here for a good reason. We had a cool job. We did cool stuff. We were the cool kids on the block because nobody got to do what we did. Nobody knew the stuff that we did. Nobody did anything we did. And that was pretty cool. And at the time, we lived a life that, I'm an E3 airman. I'm 6 months in the service. And I get kicked off base. We all do. They're like, hey, you need to move off base today. And we're all sitting there as E3s going, our base pay was $554 a month. It was a minute ago. And we just got back from leave. We got back from Christmas. We're all broke. And they're like, y'all moving off base, can't be on base. That wasn't expected. We had no idea that was going to happen. And it did. And so they helped facilitate our ability to move off base. But that's when you knew, because I went through training with guys that got stationed at Nellis like a normal Air Force security policeman. And all of a sudden we're off base and you instantly really started to figure out that something is truly different. So it was crazy. You're 18 years old. That's what I was. I was 18 years old. And when I went up, I was just before my 19th birthday. And it's crazy to think that you're doing something and nobody has any idea what you're doing. And my buddies that I went through training with, the guy, when I was in training, so I was called Senior Red Rope. So I was the head Red Rope for the squadron. And my roommate was called the House Mouse. The House Mouse is the guy who took care of all my personal stuff so I could do all the stuff that I was required to do. He got stationed at Area 2. We both were going to the same spot together. And he was living in the dorm and doing all that a normal young airman does. And we were quickly segregated and living off base. And we were living off base. We still didn't have any idea what we were doing in Vegas. So it was different and it was exciting. Now we go full circle and it's much different. It's not that anybody regrets. I mean, we did the coolest stuff there is. But now we deal with the bad stuff. No other way to really put it to me. So, you'll know. You'll talk to some of the guys.
Did you have any idea what you were being exposed to?
None. None of us knew. The first assumption is the government's not going to send you someplace that's going to cause harm. And you trust them. Yeah, people tell me all the time that, you signed up for the military. There's a certain amount of risk that you understand that you're taking to sign up for the military. And we all get that. You go off to war, there's some that won't come back. Our job, we carried a gun. If you're the guy carrying the gun, you're the target for the guy that has a gun. So you understand that. You didn't expect that the government was going to send you somewhere that just merely by the fact of sleeping there was going to cause you a problem. Everybody knows about NTS, right? NTS is where the majority of all the nuclear testing that the history of the United States government that we've done was done there. But you knew it was far away. None of us are physicists. We don't understand how anything works. But you assume it's 40, 50 miles away. Clearly, that's far enough. That's the assumption. And when I first discovered what was going on and I started talking to people, one of the statements that I heard from a couple people was, well, the officers knew. They knew that this was happening to us. And they didn't know either. I've talked to many of our commanders uprange from when we were up there, and none of them knew. And many of them, they're just as sick, they're just as dead. They wouldn't have subjected themselves to something if they thought it was like that. They didn't know. But somebody knew. And it was documented that they knew. And you never would think, we would never have expected that living in Las Vegas and being stationed out in the desert in Nevada was going to be harmful.
What were you actually exposed to? Do you know?
Yeah, there's lots of stuff. The biggest thing that we deal with is, and what was documented, is that there was plutonium-239, there's uranium, depleted uranium, tritium, americium, and beryllium. So there's like 6 different types of radioactive isotopes that exist out on the range. And they existed where we worked. They existed in our water supply. They existed in the soil. And then there was things that the guys had to work with at work that were toxic. The area that we worked, that our base was built in, there's a town not far from us, Tonopah Test Range is where we work. It's named after a town called Tonopah. And there's a little municipal airport there. That was a bomber training base in World War II. Our range was where they did practice bombing. So all the chemicals from the explosives, there was rocket motor tests up there, plus there's jet fuel. There's other things that's just that you work around that are toxic, but the list is pretty long. But you get into rocket fuel motors, the residue from the bombings, and then all the radioactive stuff. And the radioactive stuff is what's really got people sick.
What did the government say about securing the area for contamination?
Nothing. It was never even a conversation. It goes back to the assumption that they wouldn't send you somewhere that was a problem. And if there was a problem, that they would have said something. And there's nothing. Nothing was ever said.
I know before when we were talking, you said there was a barbed wire fence or something of that nature. Tell me about that.
Sometimes when we'd have to leave the base because something would happen, you go driving down dirt roads and you'd find barbed wire fences. And there would be signage up that said, don't cross the line, radioactive area. And in one of the reports that I have, it talks about how the government secured it. And that's how I found out really what these radioactive areas were. The radioactive areas that were near our base were locations of testing that took place actually on the Tonopah Test Range. And in the reports, they talk about how they secured the area so that there wouldn't be any movement of the contaminated stuff, right? The dirty ground. And they put up a barbed wire fence, and that's how they supposedly secured the contaminated dirt from spreading. Living in Las Vegas, we have wind. You know, Chicago's known as the Windy City, and we are actually windier than Chicago is, and the range is no different. There's a wind every day. And we're talking about things that you can only see with a microscope. Well, 20-mile-an-hour wind out in a super dry desert, no barbed wire fence is going to contain that. And now we joke about it, well, it was a military-grade barbed wire. There's nothing that was going to stop it. It traversed the area. One report I read said that 1,150 square miles were contaminated by the tests that took place in the valley right next to where we worked and where we slept.
Wow. What went through your mind when you saw that?
I was pissed. You're pissed? Because it goes back to the trust. You expect that they're going to take care of you, as much as they can. And the report, the piss you off part was when you read the report's like 80 pages long. It's dated in 1975. My base was built in 1979. 4 years after they do a report, says Tonopah Test Range is contaminated with plutonium. They evaluated three options. Option one was shut it down. So clearly there was enough contamination to make shutting it down a consideration. Number two was allow only limited access so nobody would be overexposed. Or number three was business as usual. And the conclusion was the benefit to national security of continuing the use of Tonopah Test Range outweighs the future environmental liabilities. We're the liability. We're the liability. And now, to protect them, they keep our existence. Our existence is still called data masked. And it's not to protect anything that's classified. There isn't anybody that's going to divulge something that we shouldn't. There isn't anybody that's going to divulge anything that isn't already known, publicly admitted to. It doesn't have anything to do with that. They keep us classified to protect themselves. And that's really not supposed to be what a classification structure is supposed to be for. You protect secrets. You don't protect yourself. And there isn't anybody involved in the government today, I think, that had anything to do with what happened in the 50s, 60s, and even 70s. Those people are retired, they've passed away, but the government still wants to keep us secret because now they know what's happened. I mean, in 1975, the government letterhead, it says, we know this happened, these are the issues that we have. Well, their problem is they still send people there today, knowing the outcome. I mean, knowing that there's already bills that have compensated the downwinders and tried to help them. There's a bill that takes care medically of all the folks that were civilian Department of Energy people and financially compensated them for what the government did. But for the DOD, officially, there's never been DOD stationed on the range. And some people, I think most people that don't live in Vegas really don't understand what takes place here. But in Vegas, if you live in Vegas, if you've lived here a long time, it's common knowledge. Everybody knows about the range. Everybody knows about the jets that fly up there or people that drive to work. And they know that the people that go up there can't talk about what they're doing. But the government knows that 30 years from now, the guy that's working up there today is likely to get sick. And
is that just infuriating for you?
It's unbelievable. I'm an employer. My wife and I own a real estate brokerage here in Vegas. As an employer, if you came to work for me and I didn't tell you that where you were going to work was toxic, that's a liability. I can get in trouble. You leave my employ and you get sick and I deny you, I'm going to get in trouble. If you die because I made you sick, I denied liability, and you died as a result of what I did to you, I'm going to jail. And the government says, well, we're the government, we can do this. Or we can keep you classified, that way nobody really knows. Well, you've seen our memorial list. It's now at 296 names of the guys that we found that have died. 2 died last weekend. And so they say that's okay. I'd ask their families if it was okay. It's not okay. So it pisses you off. And then you find out that the radiation caused miscarriages. We used to joke we had the highest divorce rate and the lowest birth rate. It wasn't necessarily an untrue statement. A lot of the divorce rate was because you're going to work, you're not telling your spouse where you're going, not always telling your spouse when you're coming home, and you go home from work at the end of the day, the average person says, how was work? Oh, it was great, I did A, B, and C. And we didn't have that conversation, and spouses would be like, don't you trust me? Didn't have anything to do with that. And then the joke was we had a low birth rate because the wives were always pissed off at the guys, so there was no having babies. And then now when we all get together, as we started all get together, we found out everybody's wives were having miscarriages. And then you find out, and in my research, I find the documentation that says, yeah, it's a problem. Yeah, this is what it causes. And then you get the birth defects. And my kids have issues. And some of the issues with the other guys that I talk to, they're horrific. I think I told you once, there's a guy that lives in Ohio who's part of us. His son has spina bifida. He's 35 years old. This year he had his 50th surgery. And the government goes, but you were never there. You were never exposed. It's not our fault. That doesn't pan out. So that's why you get pissed off, you get upset.
Do you feel betrayed by this country?
No, not by the country. I'm as big as a patriot as you could be. We were betrayed by people in the government. And there's people in the government that can't claim just being naive. And they're continuing to betray people today.
Who ultimately is at fault for this?
I don't know. If I was to tag somebody, it would be the Department of Energy as an organization. But I don't even think fault matters. Because, like I say, those people that started our nuclear program, and when Truman that decided that we were going to use Nevada as a place to do it, I don't think anybody at the time really understood what was going to happen. I think they began to understand. We knew in 1975 that they fully understood because they admitted to the problem. So at some point, somebody needed to say, time out. This just isn't a good idea. We're a big country and we need to do top secret stuff. And they do. I don't think they need to do it there. And had they had the opportunity before they even built where we were to do it somewhere else. And what was in one of the reports, they call us like a low use population, this part of the country. They don't want to do it in LA for good reason, but they maybe could have found someplace just a little bit better where it wasn't so bad.
I want to talk about the bill, and I want to talk about Bill Clinton and his bill, and I want to talk about the barbecue in just a moment. But before we do that, I just want to clarify 2 quick things. So where were you and your wife living during all of this in relation to where testing had taken place? Let's start there. So where were you actually living? Where were you commuting to or working?
So going to work meant driving to Nellis. And then at Nellis, we would get on a civilian chartered airline called Key Airlines, and we would fly to work on Key. We had an air terminal, we had a building that we would all go to, and then we'd walk out and get on the airplane and we'd fly to work. And I lived right here in Vegas, and when my wife and I got married, our first apartment was right over by UNLV, right in the center of town. And everybody that I worked with, we all lived here. And we just like anybody else.
But you weren't able to tell her what you did every day?
No. And I think everybody was really good about that. Nobody talked about it. Like now we talk about the F-117 stealth fighter, right? That's part of what we did. It was this super cool widget. You know, your first day up range, they would take you and you got to sit in this thing that nobody had ever seen before. But we didn't even say at work that it was an F-117. We didn't use the word stealth. Everything was called a resource. And you had to be a part of the conversation maybe to know what we were talking about. But you never said it at work because you would never slip. You never said anything. Okay. And she knew and she understood. And our relationship began while I was up there. And she was actually a friend of mine, a guy that I worked with, date the night we met. And we were doing the bad thing. We were having a keg party at the pool at our apartment complex, and she came as as a date. So she knew before she knew me that we were up to something. Mm. So I think that made it for us much better. She had her life, and she was a student at UNLV, and I had my life, and she knew that my life at work just was a non-thing.
Yeah. And so you've talked about the stealth fighters. Was there any other work that you did there that you are not able to talk about?
Yeah, we can't talk. I don't know why that bothers me, but yeah, there's stuff we can't talk about. And there always will be. That's okay. And that doesn't have anything to do, as I look at it, that's not what made us sick, right? That's not what hurt anybody. But yeah, there was always stuff. I mean, we lived it. I think for the most part, we were a big operation as far as being black ops, and just our day-to-day job. You didn't talk about anything. I mean, when the guys are all together and we're talking, I mean, we'll talk about stuff, but yeah, there will always be things we'll never talk about.
It strikes me that this is a government that didn't protect you, and you're still willing to protect their secrets.
It's their job. I mean, it really was. We're all proud of what we did. We made a difference. Stealth technology absolutely changed the world. We bankrupted the Soviet Union because they did everything they could to figure out how to stop our technology until they bankrupted themselves and the USSR fell apart. It's a big deal. That's what we did.
There's a lot of pride, I can tell. For
sure. I don't talk to anybody. And I'm on the phone every day. I mean, I'm a real estate broker and one full-time job, and the other full-time job is the charity. And I never get on the phone with people who say, I hate this country, I hate what we did. Nothing. They're pissed. They're disappointed. They're mad. They're suffering, or their kids are suffering. But there's no lack of pride in what we did, because everybody knows what we did. It was cool. We did cool kid stuff. So, yeah, there's no lack of pride. I take great pride in it. I look at my life as everything led up to that. And with that, I became an adult. And everything I have in life started there. So, that's how I view things. It's when you started adulting.
Does it weigh on you at all, the things that you're not able to talk about?
No, because they're just not part of life.
I understand.
I don't know how to put that. But no, there's,
It's the job, as you said.
yeah, it was the job.
Forgive me, I have to ask about this. Area 51, aliens?
No, there's no aliens out there. That is, I'm not saying there's not aliens. I mean, I know the odds and the likelihood that there's something. But yeah, no. You think, I mean, just think about this for a second. I went up there, I'm 18 years old. Most of us that went up that were young airmen were 18, 19 years old. We can keep a plane a secret. We can keep a place a secret. We can keep what we do a secret. There is no 18-year-old on the face of this planet that's going to go up there and see ET and not say something to somebody.
I don't know. I wouldn't put it past you, Dave, honestly.
No, because that's just, there's nothing. We were cops and firemen and aircraft mechanics and admin people and pilots.
So no even whispers about aliens while you were there.
Oh, and from everybody in Vegas, you know, that was the big, oh, you're guarding aliens. No, I'm not guarding aliens. Oh, yes, you are. Have you ever been there? No.
So you swear nothing on the range, nothing we need to know about?
There is nothing that I've ever seen or have ever been. Nothing. I watch the guys on TV and I'm like, because when I first went up, everybody told us that this new base that was getting built out there, that's where they were, that's the, what do they used to call it, like the Hangar 17 or something, where all that stuff was. And the Roswell stuff was sent up, and like, wasn't that cool? You know, I mean, cool for us. Your first day, when you fly up the first time, they've briefed us into the project being the stealth fighter. They take you to a secure facility and they say, here's what you're going to be doing for the next 4 years. And we look at a video of this plane flying that looks like it should not fly. That's great. That flies at night. When you land and you're looking out the window of the 727 and you see a row of Russian MiG fighter jets sitting there, you're like, time out. You all forgot a detail. There's Russian planes with a red Russian star right on the tail. And that was surprising. You know, that was shocking when you go up there. But yeah, I never found ET.
What do you think of all of the recent developments? The claims that there are crash retrievals and non-human...
I'm not one to say it's not possible. I mean, if you look at the mathematical odds of something existing somewhere, it's entirely likely. I think it's entirely possible. You know, I'm not going to sit here and think that God created us and stop there, or maybe God created something else and says, I could do better. I don't know.
But you didn't see it on the range.
But no, I didn't see it. And I've heard all the stories. And yeah.
Understood.
It's a great myth.
Understood.
I think it's a great distraction from what goes on, because it keeps people looking over here when they're doing what's over here.
I want to talk about the barbecue. When did you realize something was wrong?
So we got together because of Facebook. I got a message from somebody and they said, you know, there was a reunion, we're going to have another one. And the next one was at my house. And the first day, we're waiting for everybody to show up, and there's 8 of us that were there, and we're sitting in the backyard.
And how old are all of you now?
Old.
Or at that time? In your 50s?
49, I think. About
Almost
2014.
50.
Yeah, almost 50. And I hadn't seen any of these guys since 87. And so we're all sitting in the backyard catching up and talking about lives. And then Randy Groves, who was one of the cops uprange, and he was one of our armorers for a while, he asked, he says, does anybody have tumors? And I got real curious. I'm like, what do you mean tumors? What do you have? And he goes, well, I got like these lumps, and they're like knots. They feel like knots that are down in your skin. And he goes, and I got one on my back. And I said, well, the one on your back, I said, does it look like if you took an egg, a hard-boiled egg, and cut it? I said, does it look like that underneath your skin? He goes, yeah, it does. I said, yeah, I had one of those. I had it removed. It was the size of a grapefruit. And he looks, and I said, it grew in between my shoulder blade and my rib cage, and it was getting uncomfortable because it was creating pressure, and you could see a lump. And so I had a surgeon remove it. It was called lipoma. I had never researched it. I never thought anything of it. I just assumed, you know, everybody's got these things. I've got a little one on my forehead, and I've got on my arms, my chest. it happens, right? We're getting old. Things happen. And so he said he had one. There's 8 of us in the backyard. 6 of us had these tumors. I'm like, all right. That's when I got curious. And then one of the guys, the 7th guy, says, I don't have any, but my son was born with a tumor problem. My first son was born with a tumor problem, neurofibromatosis. And I'm like, all right, this isn't normal. What's our nexus, right? What's the nexus to all this? Well, it's Tonopah test range, it's NTTR. And I wanted to find the answer. I like to research. I get carried away sometimes. So I wanted to find out what the deal was, why all this stuff was happening. And as we all connected and we started talking to one another, you hear about, oh, such and such has got cancer, or, such and such is sick, or did you hear, this guy passed away, and
you started looking into what happened
and
to
so
all of these people.
Why is it that we all have these things? And the first thing that I find out is these lipomas. I go on National Institute of Health, found that to be a super useful website. I go on there and it says that the rate of occurrence in the general population is 1 per 1,000 to 2.3 per 1,000 people get these lipomas. Well, we're 75%. It's an anecdotal number. There's no scientific thing. But what's the chances that 6 out of 8 of us sitting in the backyard have something that they say is 1 in 1,000? Well, the odds on that start getting pretty slim. And I continue to research, why are these? Oh, well, if you're exposed to ionizing radiation, what's this about the ionizing radiation? And so I just kept researching, and it's like you go down the rabbit hole, and that hole never ends. And for 8 years, I continued to do this before I told people really what I was doing as far as the research. But you'd read a story or you'd read a report, which would reference another report, and that chain, it literally never ends. And I got to where in my research it was, there would be a word, I didn't know what it was, so I'd look up the definition, and then I'd have to look up the definitions to the words in the definition, because I'm not a doctor or I'm not a scientist. But that's where it started. At this barbecue, Randy says, does anybody have a tumor? And from there, we're here.
And what did you discover?
One, we found that there's all kinds of cancers that are caused. I've read in the National Institute of Health where they said they actually can't tell us what all it does. They know things that it does, but they know that there's things they don't know. And you start reading about the birth defects. You start reading about what it does to the reproductive system. You start to read about what it does and how it breaks down cells. And then I started talking to people, genuinely smart people that know about this stuff, that are educated. And like one physicist that I talked to, he says, look, he goes, so when they do studies, like they've done studies about x-rays, that's a controlled environment. The x-rays is a controlled dose in a controlled environment, and they look at, well, the exposure. If you're an x-ray tech, how much exposure are you going to get? That's why they have lead-lined walls and stuff in these. So you're looking at that, and the physicist goes, there's nowhere else you could go to get exposed to all of these different radioactive elements. Then all the other elements that are out there that are hazardous, and the way we disposed of things, he goes, you can't find that anywhere else. His analysis was that it was 1 in a million, not that 1 in a million you could get something. It would be 1 in a million that it didn't affect you somehow. Yeah. Because, and his statement was, he goes, all these different compounds, and that was only the compounds, that we can talk about, all these different types of ionizing radiation. He goes, there's nowhere else you could get uncontrolled exposure to all those things. And our tours were 4-year tours. And we already had, the government's already admitted to the problem with the civilian bill. And they weren't up there like we were. The folks that worked at NTS, they don't sleep up there. Their food's not cooked in the water, like ours was. And we were up there. For the civilians, it was 250 days. You qualified. We were there for 4 years. So you start putting all these things together and you read all these different reports and you talk to various people and you start to put a puzzle together that's a terrible story. And we had our chief master sergeant, the highest ranking guy that you can have as an enlisted guy in the military. Our chief died, and his funeral service was in January or February 2022. And at that point, I told the guys, a bunch of us went back. There was 20 or 25 of us, something, that went back to the chief's funeral. He was our boss. And we go back there, and I told the guys, and, I've been working on this, I've been researching this stuff, and all the answers suck. And so always what I said, all the answers suck. And one of these days we're gonna need to have a conversation. Then fall of 2022, a year ago, the next reunion was at our house. It was over Veterans Day weekend, and we're all here where we are right now. And I said, I'm putting together a PowerPoint. Believe me, don't believe me. You guys need to hear this stuff, what I'm gonna tell you. And it was like, yeah. Whatever. And so I think I think a lot of people kind of believe that there was something because a lot of us have issues.
Well, yeah. Can I ask how many people? First of all, how many members of the Air Force actually served on the range in total? Do you know? And then how many have you tracked and made contact with, and how many have health issues?
I would guess the best estimates and people that I've talked to that would have a better idea. Like our base, we started in '79. Groom Lake started in 1955. And we think there's probably been about 10,000 GI stationed out there. Almost all Air Force. We think that there's probably maybe 5,000 guys that are alive that have served out there. I would guess out of those, I've contacted at least 1,000. Thank you, Facebook. That's like my networking tool to find people. We've done some searching. There's still a bunch of guys that if I Google you, I'm going to get a long list of all about you, and you can do that on pretty much anybody. There's guys we Google and we can't track them down at all. Or you find a Facebook page that there's been no activity on for the last few years.
Of the 1,000 you've made contact with, how many have serious health issues?
I would say at least half suffer from something. The common things are there's lots of cancers, there's lots of lung problems, which is where I struggle the most. I mean, the tumors are the tumors. And it sounds dumb to say, but they're just there. But the lung problems are a big deal. There's a lot of hypertension. There's a lot of neurological type disorders. There's all kinds of organ issues because the way when you breathe in the radioactive dust from up there and it enters your bloodstream, it goes to your organs. That's why there's a lot of pancreatic issues, liver issues, kidney issues. And a lot of people don't realize that's one of the big things that happens is when I talk to people, they go, no, I don't have any problems. The first thing, do you have any tumors? And it happens all the time. I go, well, I've got these lumps. Have any lung problems? Have any problems breathing? Did you get asthma as an adult? Type thing. And then people start to realize that maybe there's a correlation. And I would say that probably half of the people that worked up there have something. There's no data that I could show you, but I've talked to people over and over and over. And the issues with kids are not uncommon.
Talk to me about the kids.
So ionizing radiation, if you remember back in biology class, you have a DNA, right? It looks like the ladder. It breaks rungs in the ladder. And that's what causes the miscarriages, and it also is what causes some of the birth defects. It alters the chromosomes. The DNA eventually heals itself, from my research, that problem eventually goes away after you leave working up there. But the chromosome type, the other issues that it creates never goes away. It's permanently altered. And we get a lot of the guys that I talk to bring up things like their kids have autoimmune disorders, whether it manifests itself as some type of arthritis or a lupus or just different things as you talk to them is real common. There's female problems. A lot of the females that served up there have really significant problems. One of the ladies that I know has had stage 4 cancer of different female things 4 times. Then you have some of the things that show up genetic, like our son, when we talked to the doctor the first time with his neurofibromatosis, they said it's a genetic disorder, but there's no genetic history in our family. The doctor at the time told us there was a 1 in 50,000 chance that that could happen. And when we were told that, when my wife and I were told that, never once did I suspect it was something from work. But that's what they said. And so they come up with this really cool term called a spontaneous mutation. You're like, nobody calls their kid a spontaneous mutation, right? That's like a big word and somebody's using to describe your kid. And but they said that's what it is. It means it's a genetic thing that there's no genetic history of. And so the chances of it are this minute that it could happen. And since I've been doing the research, a friend of mine who was on the civilian side that worked at NTS, she's a lady who worked up there back in the 60s. She was one of the ones who started that lawsuit that got the civilian compensation stuff done. Her son has the same thing. But it's a 1 in 50,000 chance that it could just happen without a genetic history. So, and there's other things like that. So I talk to guys all the time.
Can we talk about your son's story quickly? I know you said he was born and first it was spots, right? And
Yeah.
I know he's sitting right there, and we'll speak with him in a moment. But he was born, and what happened?
So when he was born out at Nellis Air Force Base Hospital. He had a bunch of birthmarks. So we counted them up, and I think it was 47 birthmarks is what we had counted. And we asked the pediatrician there at the base, what about this? This seems like a lot. And they were he's got a lot of birthmarks. Nothing to it? No, it's all good. He just has a bunch of birthmarks. Okay. And so we took that at face value. He's got a bunch of birthmarks. That's fine. When we got out, then we get civilian doctors. When we got out, we moved down to Phoenix. And Eileen took him to a pediatrician for his first visit down there. And the pediatrician questioned the spots and said, you need to get some genetic work done. So we go to a geneticist down in Phoenix. And then the geneticist says, you need to go see somebody else. Nobody the whole time has told us anything. They just keep going, well, you need to get this checked. So we go through this series of doctors. And we've ended up at a guy who was a pediatric neurologist. And we get to his office, and the doctors had put in their notes, some of the doctors had put in their notes what his condition was. Nobody would tell us out of malpractice, fear of being wrong. So when we're sitting there with this doctor, I can't remember his name right now, but he asks us, so what do you think of your son's condition? What's the condition? And we told him, nobody's ever told us anything. They send us from doctor to doctor, and this was over a period of months. And he's like, well, he has neurofibromatosis. All right, that's a big word. He goes, did you ever see the movie Mask with Cher? Yeah. So he goes, that the son in that movie has neurofibromatosis, NF. And then he goes to explain there's 2 types. One is real disfiguring, and the other is more internal. Well, get hit with that. We don't know what to think. All we've done is go to the doctors. And then he's like, well, you have a 1 in 50,000 chance of this happening with there being no genetic history. And here's what is in your future. And so we keep going back. We called it his spot doctor when he was little. He had a spot doctor. We didn't want to make anything of it. When he was little, we didn't.
Dave, can I ask, what did they say about his prognosis? What did they say the rest of his life was
So,
going to look like?
It was always prefaced with, there's always a chance, there's always hope, he could be fine, he could grow up to be this or that, but, may never be independent. May not be able to have a family. Probably won't graduate high school. He may live with you forever because he's likely to be limited. And you don't know what to think. You don't know how to take that one. And then they tell us, well, it could be something that now you're going to give all of your children, or, it could be a 50-50 shot because they're learning about this disease, this condition, at the same time. This doctor we went to, we were blessed. He's a research doctor who served on the board of directors for the NF Society for the entire country. So he's genuinely one of the smart guys about it. And he's sitting there telling you, I don't know all the answers to this. And so David ended up with a spot doctor. The insurance company, when they found out he had this, dropped him. We got a letter from Blue Cross and Blue Shield that said if we were good and decent parents, we would have known he had a pre-existing condition. And we're like, we asked the doctors when he was born, and they said, no, it was nothing. And then the first pediatrician that he went to put in his record what he felt he had. And they're like, see, he was diagnosed with it. That doesn't mean he told us. And nobody had told us. And then, as time went on, David went to his doctors. He had to get MRIs. He has a small brain tumor that's always been there. It hasn't done anything. And so the doctors have just left it alone. If it's not going to, if it's not growing, it's not causing a problem. It's just there. And it's a result of having NF. It's a common trait. And so he has, they're called cafe au lait spots. That's a result. And it caused him struggles.
Dave, how does it feel to know that something you did, the tour you did, the 4 years you did,
it's the worst. Those are the most innocent victims. They have nothing to do with nothing. I get upset. I'm an emotional guy, but if you could feel bad about something, that's it. That's been one of my struggles in doing the research, is all the answers suck. Because all the answers suck. And what are you going to do? You can't unwind things. He's a great guy. And he's exceeded everything that the doctors ever expected. He has a family. He has kids. He works hard. He's a good son. He's a good dad. He's a good brother. It gave him issues growing up, and he learned how to deal with them, and he compensated for, he has strengths and weaknesses like anybody, and he used his strengths to get where he is, and he does great. And thankfully, a lot of the things that happened to a lot of the kids, like they told us it was a 50-50 chance he could lose his eyesight. Because what happens is he's susceptible to getting tumors, and the tumors will grow on the nerve endings. Well, you have optic nerves, and that's one of the places that the tumors grow.
It's horrifying.
And we saw kids in the doctor's office who had lost an eye or they'd lost their vision. You saw in the doctor's office how bad it could be. And he's very fortunate because they tell you the worst case scenario, and he wasn't that, which is awesome. But yeah, it sucks knowing that, I went to work every day and I did my job, and my kids suffer. You know, Eileen had 3 miscarriages. Wasn't her fault. You know, it wasn't, you know, we didn't even know why it happened, but it happened. And, you know, that was one of the things is I was talking to the guys that we worked with, even females that we worked with as well, that were having miscarriages, same thing, you know, different sexes, but it caused the same issues. It caused reproductive issues. And it's just a fact.
You are blessed with 4 children. How many of them have issues that you believe are related to your time at the range? All of them.
Yeah, our next son was born with a birth defect that was surgically fixed when he was little, but not insignificant. Our oldest daughter, our number 3 child, has autoimmune issues. And they've diagnosed it. First, we thought it was going to be lupus, and it's a rare form of arthritis that she has to deal with. And then our youngest has a lot of female issues, and I believe it related because her story matches many of the women that worked uprange, and others that I've talked to, their story all sounds the same. So, you know, and not everybody had issues. I mean, like, not everybody's sick, you know, not everybody's kids have issues, but I do believe that the issues my kids were born with, especially like birth defects, that there's no history. And when the doctor tells you it's a 1 in 50,000 that could happen, and then you read how, you know, NF is a break in the strand of the DNA, and then you read that ionizing radiation causes breaks in the strand of the DNA that can be passed on to a child. It's a pretty short story on how to get from A to B on that.
There's a bill that was signed by President Clinton, is that right?
Correct.
What is it called? Who does it provide for, and why are you not included in it?
So the bill's EOIPA, EEOICPA. It's a big, long acronym. It was signed by President Clinton in October of 2000. It is a bill that originally we were included in. And the bill is to take care of and address the issues for all the nuclear workers, be it if, you know, the guys that were making the bombs, that had to do with testing, that worked where there was testing, and it covers the range. And the issue is we were included, and there was a Senate Armed Services Committee meeting before the bill passed, that I have talked to somebody who was in that meeting. She was on Senator Bill Richardson's staff. She was there with him as his legislative person, and she said DOD came in the meeting and said, remove all language related to the DOD, we'll take care of our own. And so they removed the DOD from the bill, and it left just the Department of Energy employees and contractors. And to give, you know, people think of NTS, right? Nevada Test Site, that's where the DOE was. At Tonopah, we had hangars for all of our planes. Each stealth fighter has a hangar. The hangars were built under Department of Energy contracts with Department of Energy contractors. We had to guard them and watch them when they were out there because they weren't necessarily cleared to be there, and to see what's going on. So part of our job was to guard the guys that built the hangars. The guys that built the hangars are eligible for the bill and have been compensated and get, it's called a medical white card, which is like a Blue Cross Blue Shield card from the federal government to help address their medical issues and to pay for their medical care. So the guys that we worked right next to that didn't have to be there nearly as long as we were have been taken care of, but because we're data masked, we're not taken care of.
And explain what that means. What does data masked mean?
Data masked means it's like our existence in that job is still classified. We weren't there. And when our guys and girls, when they go to file for benefits, we can show the VA our orders and our commendation medals or whatever paperwork we have, but that's not the paperwork that they use to verify our exposure. They go back to the Department of Defense ask the Department of Defense, Dave Crete's here. Dave Crete's applying for benefits for ionizing radiation. We need confirmation of exposure. The DOD says no, he was never anywhere that there was exposure.
So the DOD is denying that you and the other veterans were ever stationed there?
Correct. According to the DOD, there's never been military stationed on the range.
How is that possible?
You can say no forever. Doesn't mean it's true, but you can always say no. And so they just keep saying no. We've requested, many of us have requested our medical records. I got my medical records from the National Archives. I had a pre-enlistment physical and I had knee surgery when I blew my knee uprange on an exercise. There's nothing else in my medical record. No annual dental, no annual physical, no ER visit because I cut my finger or hurt myself or whatever. None of that's in there.
So the DOD is denying that you and all of the others were ever there?
Correct.
How does that feel?
It's just stupid. There isn't, I go back to people around the country may not understand. I mean, part of my issue when I go out and when I speak to people, I tell them, I'm here to tell you about a group of people that doesn't exist, that worked at a place that doesn't exist, that did something that didn't exist. So let's start from that. Now let me explain to you who we are and what we did. People in the rest of the country don't know as much as people in Vegas do. Everybody in Vegas knows. Everybody in Vegas knows somebody who was worked up on the range, whether it's Nevada Test Site or any of the other locations. Everybody knows.
Well, Dave, can I ask, what would the harm be? I understand that it's top secret and classified, the work that you did there, but what would the harm be in them even acknowledging that you were there? Not what you did, but just that you physically were there.
If they acknowledge me, they have to acknowledge everybody they continue to send there. It's one thing to be ignorant or to be naive, to not know and maybe not understand. Like back a long time ago, they could say, well, we didn't understand what all this testing was going to do. But they've understood for a long time. The problem is, how can they possibly explain that somebody is living up there where I lived, where all of our guys lived, at one of the locations, that people are going up there today? How do they write that? They don't. So let's just say nobody's there. It's easier.
What has happened when you've tried to contact them or try to rectify the situation?
Nobody really does anymore because you're just going to get denied. We went through like the PACT Act, which was a bill that was signed last year to compensate the Gulf War veterans and folks around burn pits and the incinerators and things. I encouraged everybody to go apply for that. We're all denied. Nobody got. The only people that got benefits out of that worked with us, were the ones that deployed to Saudi Arabia when the stealth went over there. Mm-hmm. So their time over there was fine. And some people then went to another unit and they stayed over there. So they were eligible for the PACT Act. But the guys like me and many of the rest of us were not eligible for that. And they excluded us out of that bill as well. And when I called up and I talked to an interviewer, and the interviewer, they have a list, well, where were you stationed? And they have a list of all the places that are contaminated. And I said, Tonopah Test Range. They said, not on the list, you're not eligible.
So explain to me one more time, the Clinton era bill provides for who, and what exactly does it provide for that you do not have access to?
So EEOI CPA is the bill. It provides for Department of Energy employees and Department of Energy contractors that worked with the nuclear weapons program or in the area where nuclear weapons were tested. All those people get, if they have medical conditions that are deemed related, they get a medical white card, so they get free health care for life to deal with their issues, and they get, depending on what their issue or issues are, from $150,000 to $400,000 a piece. That's what they get. And they worked in our chow hall. They built our hangars. We worked side by side them. We saw the same people every day in the same spot. but the DOD was never there.
So what are you trying to do now?
So the goal now is to get a bill. I think we're about done now, finally, on the language for the bill. Our hero in Congress is Congressman Amodei. He agreed to sponsor a bill for us, which was awesome. He did that, my first conversation with him, which was truly incredible. And that bill is, originally I was going for a much larger bill, and I think what we're doing now is we're gonna split it in half to make it easier. But the first bill is they have to acknowledge, the DOD, has to acknowledge our existence and our exposure, and that our conditions are presumptive. And that has a very important meaning for us and for the VA. It means if you have cancer and you are exposed, your cancer, it's presumptive that one is connected to the other, that my lung issue, one is connected to the other, that the tumors, one is connected to the other, the hypertension that it causes, all the different things, that it's presumptive that it's all connected. We want you to say, yes, you were there, yes, you were exposed, and yes, we get it, that your health issues are related. The second bill will then be to go a step further, to deal with the families, to deal with the other issues, whether it be compensation or to make sure, because one of the things that we've learned, we being, us as the invisible enemy and us, the people that worked out on NTTR, like one of the issues that happens is there's a real aggressive type of brain tumor that people get. One of our guys last November was fine. He died February 23rd from a brain tumor. What I don't want to see happen is he died, he had a wife and family, there's nothing there for them because the DOD says it's not connected. There was no exposure, even though 100% we know that it is connected, that it is related. He did die because of his time there, but the family gets nothing. There's not a lot of us. Where we were was toxic and they knew it, and it's not so much to be punitive. Give the guys their VA disability and make sure that when they go, the family's taken care of. Seems logical. And they need to do that. So my goal is to see everybody get 100%. I get some feedback from people going, well, if you're 100%, well, that means you really have something wrong. But my question to them is, are you sick when you drink the poison, or are you sick when it finally manifests itself in a condition? I would argue you're sick when you drink the bleach, not when the bleach has a reaction to you. You're sick when you're exposed. How it manifests itself, we'll see. But when it manifests itself, you could have 3 months. The government doesn't work that fast. And what's the value of, on our memorial list that we have, I've started asking people, if Bob died, how old was Bob? And it looks like that the folks that we honor died in their early to mid 60s. It's not normal. What's that value? Give me a number. You can't. So why are we going to wait? You poisoned them. You knew it. You poisoned them. You knew you poisoned them. You ignored them. You denied them benefit. You denied them treatment. You denied their families. And the guys are dying in their 60s. Not all of them.
So just so I understand, so the bill is now split up into two parts, and the first part has no reparations or money attached to it at all. It's just acknowledgement.
Well, it'll have money attached to it insofar as it'll avail VA benefits. But
because all of you are eligible for regular VA benefits, but not for conditions related to radiation. Is that right?
Correct.
I see. Okay.
So if you don't,
But like the white card and the 300 to 400K, none of that.
I don't get that.
Ready? Okay. So explain to me one more time. So the first, you're trying to push through a bill in two parts. The first part does what?
So the first part is to get acknowledged. that we were there, to acknowledge the exposure. So when we go to the VA and we have a condition, that they can verify that it's related. And that will then make the Veterans Administration, the VA benefits that we were all promised, available for the conditions that people deal with due to the exposure from being uprange. And it is more than just the radiation, but it's the radiation and then all the other stuff. But right now, we weren't there, so we weren't exposed. And so if you go down and they say, that your condition, it's caused by ionizing radiation, and they're going to go, well, you were never exposed, you were never anywhere that was there, so it's not our problem. And if you don't have another VA condition, something that's service connected, and it just happened to a buddy of mine, you could walk into the VA hospital, they're not going to see you, even though what he's being tested for is 100% related.
And the medical costs, I'm assuming, can be crushing from these things.
Well, like with our son, he got dropped from insurance, and then it became pre-existing condition, so nobody would insure him. He didn't have insurance we weren't able to get him insurance until he was about 18 years old, so we cash paid everything. He had to get annual MRIs. Every time if he'd get a bad headache, they were worried that the tumor was doing something. We'd rush him down, and we'd go in, and it sounds horrible, but I'd be in the emergency room talking to the billing department, negotiating the fees that I was getting ready to pay. And we had a credit card that was always ready, that was specifically there to pay for something if we had to take him in.
How many thousands of dollars are we talking about?
I couldn't even begin to tell you. Thousands and thousands of dollars. So if he'd get a cold like any other kid. He would get amoxicillin like any other kid. And so it was always self-pay. Yeah. Every time we went. His pediatric neurologist was great, because that's expensive doctor, extreme specialist. All he would ever charge us is a copay. He's like, average copay is $20. You guys, when you come see me, it's $20.
That's kind of him.
It was. And that was super helpful. And he had other doctors. He had a pediatric psychiatrist and other doctors that he went to go see that were specialists. And most of those specialists would do things like that because they got it. You can't afford to pay for that stuff. But all the other testing and all of his normal, the kid's got a runny nose stuff, we cash paid everything pretty much the entire time he was a kid.
Back to the bill. So the first part of this bill is acknowledgement from the DOD that you all exist and actually served at the range, and also VA benefits for any health effects related to your time exposed to ionizing radiation.
Correct.
The second part of this bill does what?
So the second part of the bill is where we're going to address the issues with the family members, address compensation, as far as in the EOIPA, the EEOI CPA. Benefits similar to that. My argument is that we're no lesser a person. We should be treated no differently. We're not saying we're better than anybody. We're not. But we're also no less than anybody. We're not a second-class citizen. We're just vets.
So the same $300,000 or $400,000 per person.
Yeah, I do think that should be done. I mean, I don't know how that's going to go, but I think it's right. Because again, I go back to, you were poisoned. The guys are dying before they should be dying. Their families have incurred medical expenses they shouldn't incur. One example, our son David, when he was about 13 years old, got on a little motorized scooter. Not the most coordinated child God ever created. He had what was called an explosive fracture in his elbow because he fell on it. And his arm swelled up and we had to rush him to the hospital. He had to go into the trauma center. He has surgery, he has plates put in his arm. We had to self-pay. That one was about $50,000.
Wow.
3 weeks later, he's going to therapy at the same hospital. His cousin, kicks his foot, just messing with him, not how kids do that. He falls and a rib went through his spleen. Oof. He's back in the trauma center. That was another $50-something thousand. Yeah. We're self-pay. So it's not like it's a profit center. But the reason that was self-pay is because he had a birth defect that was related to my time on the range.
Right.
And other people go through the same thing. Even there's a bill called RECA, which is known as the Downwinders Bill, where they are writing checks to people for $50,000 to people that all have cancer and stuff. That's not compensating them. That's, giving them a hug and make them go away.
Yeah. Well, and let me ask you, wasn't this bill introduced last year? Or a version of this bill? Or is this the first time that it will be introduced?
No, there is a bill that's complementary to ours, I think. Congresswoman Dita Titus has a bill that makes conditions related to ionizing exposure presumptive. So her bill, in fact, would help ours. Not related, but I'm very supportive of it.
Okay, and when should your bill be introduced?
I hope that we have the language done in January and that will get introduced sometime in February.
What do you want every American to know about what happened to you and your family and those you served with?
We did something important. We did good work. We changed things. I mean, we ended the Cold War, truly. And we're not a second-class citizen. We don't want to be treated as something better than we are. But we don't deserve being ignored by saying we don't exist. We did great work. We just want what every other veteran should have received or any other person has received. We just want to be an equal.
Have you found with many of the veterans you've spoken with that there's fear of retribution?
Yes.
Tell me more about that.
There are people that won't. Some of our members won't talk to you.
Why?
Fear of retribution. We all sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, that tells you you're going to go to jail for 10 years, up to 10 years, and you could have up to a $10,000 fine if you spill secrets. I'm not worried about that because we're not spilling secrets. Everything that I say, I have a government document that's publicly available backing it up. I just ended up with a lot of government documents backing it up.
Is there any issue or conflict with you saying that you were even there, given that it's classified information?
No, because in November of 1988, President Reagan came out and said that the stealth fighter exists. It was developed at the Tonopah Test Range and acknowledged that the test range existed. Even acknowledged the units. And here's where the DoD splits hair. They acknowledge the unit that developed it, but they don't acknowledge the people that were members of the unit.
How can a unit exist without people to staff it?
Yeah, that plane didn't fly itself, it didn't fix itself, it didn't fuel itself, it didn't guard itself. But they would rather you believe that. And it doesn't take a huge leap of logic to say it probably took a pilot, it took a mechanic, it took a fuel guy, and it took some cops running around to make sure nobody saw it. So they acknowledge that. Groom Lake was acknowledged in 2008 by President Obama. I think it was 2008, that it exists. And so that's what we say. Those are the names we use, and that's what we say is there. That's what we call things, because that's what they acknowledge. And we don't go any further than that.
Did you work on any technology that the public is not aware of?
There's things the public is not aware of. Doesn't make it bad, it's just they're not aware.
Are you ever worried for your own safety coming forward and talking like this?
In some ways. one of the things I did early on is I went to a reporter here in town that I had a relationship that I knew of that I could talk to, and I asked her if she would do a story. And she did, and she said, why? I said, if everybody knows. I'm safe when everybody knows.
That's why you want to speak out.
Mm-hmm. If I'm the only one that knew, it'd be easy to shut the messenger up. And I don't know that they would do that or not do that. I have my opinions maybe. But I think I'm safer if everybody knows.
You and Pomp message each other every day. Are you willing to talk with me about that?
We say good morning. We say good morning. That's it.
Why do you make a point of doing that every day?
We're brothers. He's just uglier. No, we're brothers. You say good morning to family.
Is there any element of making sure that the other person is still okay?
Sure. Check on your family, right?
Are you glad that NewsNation is telling this story?
Yeah, I think it's great. I've talked to other reporters, and it's always been local. But I think it's great that you're sitting here. I think it's great that NewsNation did this. I was surprised. You were the first national reporter that talked to us at all. And I think that's pretty cool. I genuinely do. I also think it's pretty surreal. Like I told my wife, you called up a couple weeks ago, and I said, is it just me? Or I'm nobody, and some national anchor, is calling me up wanting to talk to me about something, and that some network wants to fly people out to Vegas to come talk to us. Like I said earlier, I never told anybody till February. Life's changed a lot. It's crazy.
Why are you glad that we're here?
Because our story needs to be told. People need to know who we are, because we're asking the government to do something for us that we feel that we're entitled to, that I think the guys are entitled to. I mean, there's nothing in this for me, really. It's about everybody. And every time I get a talk, one more person learns about who we are, what we did, and what we're asking for.
Who are you? What did you do? What are you asking for?
We're vets that had the cool job a long time ago that ended up with some side effects from what we did. But we're really a group of guys that are getting old that have some health issues, and our families, some of our family members have some health issues, but we're a group of vets that just need a little help.
So I think you started to research and you jumped on Facebook, right?
Yeah, so I started to research, and I started to talk to guys, and it was really I just kept researching and researching, trying to find answers and trying to understand. Like, one of the issues that was an issue is that there's all kinds of nicknames that people have for where we worked. I found out I did not know all the nicknames for the places, for what our locations were called. And so it was beginning to learn what these locations really were, where maybe in one report it was called this. I never heard that. So then I got to figure out what this is or where this was at in relation to something else. And like cross-reference, because you could talk about one place. For example, we had Cactus Peak, which is a mountain that was next to where we are. There's no secret, it's on Google. And they were talking about tests that took place in Cactus Flat. We referred to it as the dry lake bed. Never heard the term Cactus Flat. So then I go on Google and I type it Cactus Flat, Nevada. And then it would show up going, well, that's here. And I'm like, who knew? And so you start out trying to figure out where these different places are that they were talking about. Then you try to figure out what these words meant, some of the different things. And then you start, as you read these reports, like the reports are written in a code. They're written in a different language. And so then it was trying to understand what that language was. You get these scientists, they don't speak like I do. I'm a real estate broker and I can tell you all about something and have you not understand anything I said because I'm going to talk to you in realtor language. Well, I had to learn the science language and I'm not proficient yet, but I've learned a lot. And so I just kept studying and looking up definitions of words and trying to figure out how things met and what things meant, and talk to people that actually understood it and said, can you put this in simple English for me so I understand what it is that I'm talking to or talking about? Or maybe there'd be a doctor I know and say, what does this mean? And because the words look like they're 10 miles long. And when I started giving presentations, I would go on Google and the little speaker so you could hear how to pronounce the word. So I would sound half intelligent when I was speaking. And when you go down that rabbit hole and it's report after report after report, I've probably saved, I'll bet I have 15,000 pages of documents saved. And then you start finding things how the original report was one thing, and as you go through time, those reports change. And you had to read real careful because sometimes you would start to find maybe somebody didn't want that information out there, so they would start to change the way they would refer to things. I found that super common with the Department of Energy, that they would, that stories would change. So it was just a process of trying to learn and trying to find more than one source maybe for information and making sure it wasn't hearsay.
Sure.
I didn't want to read the reports of what somebody said that somebody said.
Go to the source.
So it took a long time. And it took even just learning how to search the internet. You type something in, you don't get an answer. Mm-hmm. So change the way you ask the question, and you keep changing the way you ask the question. And then you start using different different browsers to ask the question, and you find out you really do get different answers from different browsers.
Sure.
And they call clickbait, right? You keep clicking and see where you end up, and then all of a sudden you'd find what you were looking for.
Tell me about the shirt.
So we're military, and there's a company, it's not a plug, I'm not paid by them, but there's a company called Grunt Style that has a lot of military looking kind of things. And then one of our guys, Mark Pennicus, is much better at a computer and designing things than I'll ever be. And it was Mark and Randy Groves that you've met, and myself coming up with ideas. And Mark put together a patch And so literally we go out and we buy these kind of military looking shirts, and we put our patch on it. And that is now, when we're out, that's our uniform, if you will. And even when we went back, Randy and I were in DC a couple of months ago. And so every day when we were walking the halls of Congress, we wear these shirts because to us it means something and it's recognizable.